You premiered in 2018, making us fall in love with the charming yet psychotic Joe Goldberg, played by Penn Badgley. We watched Lifetime's show as he won over Elizabeth Lail's Guinevere Beck, followed the show as Netflix picked it up, and took us through his struggles with love, family, and parenthood with Victoria Pedretti's character, Love Quinn. Season 4 watched Joe deteriorate mentally as he went full Tyler Durden with Reese Montrose while becoming the Eat the Rich killer. And now, Season 5 is upon us. How will Joe Goldberg / Will Battleheim / Jonathan Moore / Reese Montrose's story end? Only time will tell, but for now, while I wait for Season 5, I thought I'd take you through Season 1 to 4 with a brief breakdown of every episode and my thoughts on them. Let's get into this. But first, some history. The first season of the TV series You was produced by A&E Studios in association with Alloy Entertainment, Berlani Productions and Warner Horizon Television. The showrunners were Greg Berlani and Sarah Gamble and Leslie Morgenstein. Filming took place in New York City and wrapped on December 19th, 2017. The 10-episode season premiered on September 9th, 2018 on the Lifetime Network. But with that brief prologue out the way, let's get into Season 1. Season 1, Episode 1, Pilot. Bookstore manager Joe Goldberg meets aspiring writer Guinevere Beck, and an internet search about her leads to Joe following Beck around, monitoring her social interactions, and even entering her apartment while she is out. Joe is nearby when a drunken Beck falls onto a subway track, and he saves her. Joe takes Beck home, but steals her phone, giving him full access to everything she does, with her new phone, due to it, automatically synchronizing with her old one. Beck later stops by the bookstore to thank him for rescuing her, and he asks her out. Joe lures Beck's philandering boyfriend Benji to the basement of his shop, hits him in the head with a mallet, and locks him in a plexiglass book vault. I like this episode. It's a great pilot and introduces the characters well. I like Beck, but trust me, we'll get better female protagonists. For now, S tier. Episode 2, The Last Nice Guy in New York. Joe is not sure what to do with Benji, who is a drug-addicted trust fund baby and desperate to be freed. Meanwhile, when Beck rejects her professor's advances, he threatens to take away her teaching assistant job and consequently her housing. Beck's wealthy friend, Peach, is suspicious of Joe. Beck turns the tables on her professor, Lee, by threatening to expose his sexual harassment of her and 6 other women. After obtaining a video of Benji hazing a fraternity pledged to death, Joe gives him a coffee laced with peanut oil, and Benji dies from an allergic reaction. A decent follow-up to the pilot. Joe's murder of Benji and the introduction of Peach being suspicious of Joe, which comes back later. A tier for sure. Episode 3. Maybe. Joe plans how to get rid of Benji's body while Beck is intimidated by Blythe, a rival graduate student. Joe doubles down on his efforts to convince Beck that he is the one for her after finding out she is still having sex with other men in order to get over Benji. Joe overhears Beck telling her friends that she is not completely sure about Joe, calling him a maybe. Beck opens up to Joe about her addict father, but their attempt at lovemaking is interrupted by Peach, who needs to be taken to the hospital for a chronic ailment. Joe is almost caught by hikers while he's burning Benji's body in the woods as he is talking to Beck on the phone. She invites him over to her apartment and they finally have sex, but he prematurely ejaculates. This one is kind of mid, but there are a handful of good moments, namely I'm Not a Maybe, I'm the One, and Joe getting caught by the hikers, and of course, who could forget the 8-second king? C tier sounds fair to me. Episode 4, The Captain. Beck surreptitiously messages her friends about Joe's disappointing lovemaking, which he sees via her old phone, still monitoring her texts. Joe sees that Beck has made a weekend plan with an older man she names the Captain, and lies to her friends about it. A jealous Joe follows her to the Charles Dickens Festival in Yak, and soon learns that the man is her father, Edward, who she had previously said was dead. Meanwhile, Peach has learned that Joe is in Nyack, which forces him to reveal himself to Beck. They go to lunch with Edward and his new family, but Beck explodes at her critical and disapproving stepmother, Nancy. Beck explains to Joe that her father left her family over a drug overdose, and although he has overcome his addiction, she has kept him at a distance. Joe and Beck have sex again, this time much to Beck's satisfaction. Yikes, it seems like we're just going downhill. This is D tier to me, at least in comparison to the others. It's not that this isn't good, but compared to what we've seen so far, I just don't care for the stuff with Beck's family. As I said before, D tier. Episode 5, Living with the Enemy. Peach continues to be suspicious of Joe, who seeks a way to neutralize her. Peach makes a show of introducing Beck to a famous literary agent, but when he hits on Beck and tells her the negative things Peach said about her, Beck blows up at Peach. Joe sees through Peach's subsequent faked suicide attempt and, in accessing her laptop, comes to realize she is infatuated with Beck. Knowing that Peach will always win Beck's attention, Joe follows Peach on her morning run in Central Park and hits her over the head with a rock. Joe arrives home to find that his neighbor Paco has drugged his abusive stepfather Ron to protect his mother. Joe saves Ron, but the unhinged Ron beats him. Joe learns that Peach is alive. This is a banger. Joe's interaction with his neighbor Paco, and of course, this is why I took up jogging. An absolute A-tier episode. Episode 6, Amor Fou. A recovering Peach is staying with Beck, and she banishes Joe. Joe explains to Beck that Peach is in love with her and trying to keep Beck dependent on her. Joe secretly follows when Peach whisks Beck off to the Salinger family estate in Greenwich, but he hits his head and begins hallucinating his ex-girlfriend Candace. Peach invites her and Beck's old friend Raj over. They all ingest MDMA, and Peach attempts to initiate a threesome with Beck and Raj. Beck turns down her advances and leaves the room to text Joe. Beck confronts Peach about the kiss and she leaves, after which Peach discovers Joe in the house and pulls a gun on him. She accuses him of stalking her, and Joe reveals that he knows about her. They wrestle for the gun and Peach is killed. Joe types a suicide note on Peach's computer, leading detectives to believe that Peach shot herself. Yeah, I love this one. Joe in Peach's house and the piss jar, which comes back later, I assume. I mean, just there's so much stuff here. We've got our next S tier. Episode 7, Everything Ship. Joe makes an appointment with Beck's therapist, Dr. Nikki, using the alias Paul. He talks about how his relationship with Ronaldo, really Beck, was going well after Peach's death a month before, but slowly deteriorated. With Beck becoming increasingly moody, distant and secretive, Joe jealously follows her, but she catches him. He accuses her of cheating on him with a therapist, and she breaks up with Joe. In the present, Joe listens to one of Beck's therapy sessions on Dr. Nikki's computer, which makes Joe realise Beck is better off without him right now. He tells her what she wants to hear and lets her go. D tier, no notes, just a bit forgettable to me. Episode 8, You Got Me, Babe. 3 months after his and Beck's breakup, Joe is happily dating Karen, and Beck's story about Peach's death has landed her a book deal. Beck begins to miss Joe and begins texting him after intentionally running into him at a food truck in Joe's neighborhood. Both Beck and Joe confide in Dr. Nikki. Beck denies flirting with Joe, but is sure that Karen is wrong for him, while Joe is starting to compare his new love, Brad, Karen, with his ex, Ronaldo, Beck. Joe and Beck reconnect while helping Blythe move in with Ethan, and Joe and Beck later have sex. A tearful Beck admits to Joe that she knows now that how good he was for her, but she was afraid to need him. Joe breaks up with Karen and rushes over to visit Beck, who agrees to get back together with him. Karen confronts Beck, leading her to become suspicious of Joe's past. I like Joe's little glass smashing as he tries to pull a say anything. Everything else, though, forgettable. Yet again, another D tier. Episode 9, Candace. Joe recalls Candace cheating on him with Elijah, whom Joe subsequently and impulsively pushes to his death from a building after confronting him. Meanwhile, since Joe will not talk to her about Candace, Beck begins her own investigation to learn what happened between them and why no one ever heard from Candace again. When her efforts lead to a dead end, who explains everything to Beck's satisfaction? Joe takes Beck to meet Mooney, who has had a stroke and is unable to communicate. Joe's father figure and the original owner of the bookstore Joe works in. Joe discovers that Beck did have an affair with Dr. Nikki, which she finally admits before telling Joe she loves him. Clued in by something Paco says, Beck discovers Joe's hiding place in the bathroom ceiling. She is horrified as she finds her old cell phone as well as Benji's and Peach's, in addition to other disturbing mementos which Joe has kept. When Joe realizes what Beck has found, he knocks her out and locks her up in the book vault. This is a great one. It's so tension-filled as you watch, like, everything play out in Beck's investigation. And, that scene in Joe's toilet where he, finally locks her up. Definitely an S tier. Episode 10, Bluebeard's Castle. Joe learns from Annika and Lynn that Peach's family have hired a private investigator to look into her death. Imprisonment prompts Beck to write about her own actions, which have brought her to the current situation. And she suggests to Joe that he used Dr. Nikki as a scapegoat for his crimes. Ron's abuse puts Claudio in the hospital, and Joe kills him to protect Paco. Joe explains to Beck his reasoning for murdering Benji and Peach, and relates it to his childhood mental abuse at Mooney's hands. She appears to empathize with Joe and seems grateful for his actions. Beck lures Joe into the vault and manages to lock him in, revealing that it was all just an act to get him to open the door so she could get out. Still trapped in the basement, she calls out to Paco, who leaves her without calling the police in order to protect Joe. Joe escapes the vault and kills Beck. 4 months later, Joe has used Beck's writing to frame Dr. Nikki for all of Joe's murders. Claudia and Paco move out to California. Joe is stunned when Candace comes back into the bookstore, telling him they have unfinished business. Another great one. I fucking love this episode, and honestly, it would have been S tier if it weren't for the fact that episode 9 was so fucking brilliant. I'll still happily slap this in A tier, though. I loved this season. I remember the day I started it as I choked down at McDonald's, trying not to puke the day after prom. And honestly, I forgot how banging this was, but my rewatch reminded me. I love season 1, a clear 8 out of 10. Unfortunately, it didn't make quite the splash with audiences at the time because Lifetime didn't want to pick up a second season. If only this was a bit more like the book, because I would have loved it. Definitely still amazing though. I mean, it doesn't matter in the end because Netflix picked it up. Now for season 2. Season 2 of the Netflix series You was filmed in Los Angeles from February to June 2019. That's right, this is officially Netflix's You because they picked it up and carried it on. The season was based on Caroline Kepnes's novel Hidden Bodies. The second season premiered in December 26, 2019, and features new characters like Love Quinn, played by Victoria Pedretti. Episode 1, A Fresh Start. After an intense encounter with Candace, during which she vows to make him suffer, Joe flees New York for Los Angeles, using the name Will. He secures an apartment and gets a job in the book cafe of a trendy family-owned grocery store, a Navrin. There he meets Love Quinn, a local woman who works in the kitchen. A nervous Joe resists her advances while befriending Ellie, Alvis, his 15-year-old neighbor, played by Jenna Ortega before she was huge. After Ellie coaches Joe to create an authentic social media presence, Love takes him on a food tour of the city to get to know him, and he finds himself very attracted. A mysterious visitor to his apartment prompts Joe to visit the real Will, whom he has locked inside the plexiglass vault in a rented storage unit. Joe recalls how seeing and then stalking Love led him to find an apartment near hers and get a job where she works. This is a great season premiere, better than season 1 in my opinion, and I gave that an S, so logically this one should get one too. S tier. Episode 2. Just the Tip. Joe recalls his arrival in LA and meeting with Will, a man who sells clean identities. Joe knocks out Will and locks him in the vault, assumes his identity. In the present, Love kisses Joe and he starts imagining Beck nearby whenever he is with Love. Will's visitor Jasper cuts off the last joint of Joe's pinky finger when he does not have 50,000 Will owes him. Joe spies on a lunch between Love and her 3 friends, Lucy, a Hollywood agent, Sunrise, Lucy's girlfriend, and Gabe, Love's pansexual best friend. Love catches Joe in a lie and is upset, but they later mend fences and agree to be friends, as Joe is genuinely afraid he will hurt her. Joe lures Jasper into the storage unit and kills him, and a guilty Joe apologizes to his vision of Beck. After having his finger joint reattached, Joe dismembers Jasper's body in the Navrin kitchen and puts him through the meat grinder. Ellie's older sister Delilah, a reporter, tells Joe that she was drugged and raped at the age of 17 by a well-known comedian, Henderson. Yeah, I love this episode too. I love the stuff with Joe being conflicted with Love and Beck's ghost, and him losing his finger and killing Jasper and taking him out in the Navrin. Just great stuff. Seeing the back and forth between Delilah and the implication of Henderson's death soon to come is great too. Another S tier episode. Episode 3. What Are Friends For? While Joe struggles to resist his attraction to Love, he befriends her self-absorbed twin, 40, an inspiring writer, director, producer who plays at managing a Navrin. Joe's attempt to reconnect with Icy Love backfires and she argues with 40 about his career aspirations. Joe catches Ellie hanging around with Henderson and vows to protect her from the Predator, having already surreptitiously installed spyware on her phone, looking for dirt on Henderson. Joe bluffs his way into a comedian's house party. 40 tags along to pitch a project to Henderson, but has a drug-fueled meltdown. Joe sees kindness in Henderson before he takes 40 home with him and summons Love. Joe has sex with Love and sees another side of her. After getting Will back on his meds, Joe has him search Henderson's stolen laptop, but he finds nothing. 40 tells Joe about a kinky secret room Henderson has in his house. I just love Joe's interactions here. I mean, with 40 and Love, and even his interactions with Will. These two are really bonding despite their odd situation. I mean, he has a good interaction with Ellie as well. This is just a good episode. A tier seems entirely fair. Episode 4. The Good, the Bad, and the Hendy. Joe's blossoming relationship with Love is challenged by 40's neediness, but Joe at least manages to win over Love's friends. From the vault, Will helps Joe break into Henderson's house. In the secret room, he finds a Polaroid photo of an unconscious woman, including Delilah. He takes them with him and then leaves them at Delilah's doorstep for her to find so she can expose Henderson. Joe learns that Ellie has discovered and disabled spyware and is going over to Henderson's place. From the other room, Joe watches Henderson drug Ellie's drink, so he doses Henderson as well. Joe tries to elicit a confession but accidentally locks Henderson down the stairs and kills him. As promised, Joe releases Will, with Will's assurance that he will stay quiet about his ordeal and disappear. While Love and 40 are out of town at a film festival, 40 meets an attractive woman calling herself Amy, who is actually Candace. I like this episode. We've seen shit spiral out of Joe's control before, but this really feels like where it starts to get incredibly entertaining and go incredibly wrong for him. The stuff with Candace going back as well is great too. It just means that we're going to see some great stuff in the coming episodes. I really like their dynamic, and it was a given that she would return, but that doesn't mean it's not welcomed. A tier. Episode 5. Have a Good Well, Ken Joe. Falling in love with Love, Joe accompanies her to a wellness retreat organised by her parents for their anniversary. 40 arrives with Candace, who found Joe after randomly seeing an online video of 40's meltdown at Henderson's. Candace recalls attempting to leave Joe, but then finding herself his prisoner. Thinking he accidentally killed her, he buries her in a shallow grave, but she later awakens and crawls out. Candace's presence puts Joe on edge, which is not helped by Love's dysfunctional family dynamic. After 40 implodes and Love has a confrontation with her mother, Love tells Joe about 40's childhood abuse. Joe tells Love that he loves her. Candace puts Joe on notice, and he soon learns that Candace has convinced 40 to adapt Beck's book into a screenplay. Though initially determined to be a suicide, the police now believe that Henderson's death was a murder. I would hate this Well-Kenned episode bollocks without Candace for closing in to add suspense. Genuinely, that is the one thing bumping this up from an F to a D tier, and that I Wolf You stuff is always cringe. It always was, but as I said, D tier. Episode 6, Farewell My Bunny. The group attends Henderson's funeral and Love remembers her last days with her late husband. After catching Candace in a small lie, Love hires a private investigator to follow her. Candace appears at Joe's apartment while he is out, so he goes to her place at night to eliminate her. Meanwhile, Candace breaks into Joe's apartment, but Love is waiting for her. Love has learned Candace's identity and troubled history, and Candace counters with the truth about Joe's past. Love confronts Joe, who convinces her that he fled New York to get away from his obsessive ex, Candace, and that her darker accusations are lies. Love breaks up with him anyway, but 40 insists Joe keep his job. Joe comforts Delilah, who is upset that Henderson's transgressions will never be made public, and they have sex. Again, pretty mid, but I like the "and you're basically Dexter" scene, mainly because I'm a Dexter shill, but also just because it's a good scene. By the way, if you enjoyed this, you'll probably like my Dexter stuff, so go watch that. And also subscribe, because 97.1% of you who watch my videos aren't subbed, and that's crazy. Also, I'm getting sidetracked, I'm just going to cut this off. C tier. Episode 7, Existential Crisis. After breaking up with Joe, Love rebounds with Milo, her late husband's best friend. Joe tries to get into the dating game by downloading an app for book lovers, only to get disappointed with flawed dates. Joe follows Milo's hiking, but encounters Gabe, who takes him to a very emotional spiritual treatment. Delilah thanks Joe for suggesting she write an article about her experience with Henderson, and they end up drinking, having sex on the street, and being arrested for it. Fincher refuses to help them, so 40 uses his connections to bail them out. Milo tries to take his relationship with Love to the next level, but she is not ready to commit. 40 picks a fight with Milo, getting Joe involved and angering Love. Fincher's suspicions about Joe's involvement in Henderson's death prompts Delilah to search his apartment. She finds the storage unit keys and is taking pictures of the vault when Joe arrives. Tipped off by his nanny cam, he locks her inside, but says he will let her go the next day after he has safely left town. This episode would be wank, in my opinion, if it wasn't for the Delilah plotline. That alone is bumping this up from a C tier to a B tier. Episode 8, Fear and Loathing in Beverly Hills. 40 arranges a self-kidnapping, and he and Joe are locked in a hotel room to polish 40's script, assisted by Ellie. Joe is uneasy but realizes that he will only leave on time to escape before Delilah's release if he helps them. They go over the script and Ellie suggests they rewrite it from scratch. 40 gets frustrated and escapes from the room. Joe follows him into a bar and 40 drugs him with LSD to help the creative process. Love finds Joe's farewell letter. Joe tries to stay sane while 40 works on the script but hallucinates and loses time. Joe reconciles with Love, who convinces him to stay in LA, and 40 finally finishes the script, deducing correctly that Beck's ex-boyfriend killed her in a crime of passion. 40 confesses to Joe that as a teen, he blacked out and murdered his au pair lover. The next morning, when he wakes up, Joe races to Delilah before the handcuff timer can go off, only to find her dead inside the vault. I fucking love this episode. The dynamic between Joe and 40 and the scene of Joe hallucinating in the bath are amazing. The whole sequence with them tripping on LSD is great. And the tension with Delilah being set free while Joe can do nothing, only for it to come out that she's been murdered by some mystery person. It's just great. It's an amazing episode. An instant S tier. Episode 9. P.I. Joe. Joe tries to retrace his steps while under the influence because he does not believe he murdered Delilah. Suspecting Will, Joe calls him in, but he is in Manila as promised. Joe learns from Calvin that he came to a nav room with 40 to get some groceries. Joe learns from 40 that he dropped Joe off to visit Delilah, and then 40 called Candace. Candace and 40 argue, but in examining her video call from 40, Candace sees Joe in the location where he was dropped off. She arrives at the storage unit to find Joe standing over Delilah's body in the vault and locks Joe in. She calls Love to prove to her that Joe is a very dangerous man. Love arrives, and Joe, believing he murdered Delilah, confesses everything to Love and apologizes to Candace. Love then murders Candace and professes her love to Joe. This kind of acts as part 2 of Fear and Loathing in Beverly Hills, and as such, it's just as brilliant. I'm going to give this one S tier. Episode 10, Love Actually. Love reveals to Joe that she made him fall in love with her by meticulously studying his past. She also admits to murdering both Forty's au pair and Delilah. Joe's image of Love is shattered as he understands that he is her Beck. Love then explains that she has a plan to give them and Forty a way to build a real family. She will implicate Ellie in Henderson's murder, but then have the Quinn family lawyers get the case closed. Also stage Delilah's death as a suicide caused by the backlash from her article. Joe is tempted to kill Love, but stops after she reveals she is pregnant with his baby at Lucy and Sunrise's wedding. Joe decides to love and stay with Love. Convinced that Joe was Beck's real murderer, Forty tries to save Love from him. Joe finds Ellie, reveals Delilah's fate, and sends her away with money before Child Protective Services can come for her. Forty confronts Joe with a gun at a Navrin, but is shot and killed by Fincher. Forty is suspected of being involved in Henderson and Candace's deaths, and Love uses her family connections to clear the way for Joe and Love to move into a new house, and Joe's obsessive patterns resurface when he reveals his interest in their new female neighbor. Again, this kind of acts as part 3 to the last 2 episodes, and it is fucking brilliant. Love's reveal to have been stalking Joe, the reveal she's pregnant, Forty realizing what Joe is. The only thing I dislike is how quickly the Forty plotline wraps up. He just kind of fucking dies. I honestly would have liked to see the suspense of the pair build up over season 3 and come to a boiling point in the final episode, but we can't have it all. This isn't enough to ruin the finale for me though. Still S fucking tier. Honestly, this didn't do much for me when I first watched it, but I loved it on a rewatch. That's not to say I didn't enjoy it on my first watch. Clearly the audience had a positive impact to season 2, loving Love, and thus Netflix greenlit season 3. For now, a 9 out of 10. This is much better than the book it's based on, that being Hidden Bodies, I'll be honest. Now, let's move on to series 3. Production for You Season 3 began on November 2nd, 2020, and initially concluded in April 2021. Filming was briefly suspended for 2 weeks in late December 2020 due to a surge in COVID-19 cases. Production resumed in February 2021 and wrapped in April 2021.
And they lived happily ever after. Love and Joe find themselves overwhelmed with their newborn son Henry, which strains their relationship. Meanwhile, Joe struggles to bond with Henry and becomes infatuated with their next-door neighbor Natalie Engler, a real estate agent and the wife of a wealthy tech mogul, Matthew Engler. Love tries to fit in with the Madre Linda social circle by befriending Sherry Conrad, a local Instagram influencer. Natalie notices Joe's interest in her and invites him for a wine night. Kiss, but Joe has second thoughts and returns home to have sex with Love for the first time in months. The following night, they attend a party hosted by Sherry, where Love overhears her gossiping about her family and the death of her brother Forty. Following a brief conversation with Natalie, Love accuses Joe of being obsessed with her, which he denies. Later, Natalie shows Love a vacant store to open a bakery, and Love murders her on the property basement after discovering Joe's box of paraphernalia he stole from Natalie. It's a pretty good opening episode, admittedly pretty weak compared to previous 2 seasons. B tier. Season 3, episode 2, So I Married an Axe Murderer. Joe and Love attend couples therapy to address their struggling marriage. Meanwhile, they develop a strategy to dispose of Natalie's body at a nearby forest and create a convincing alibi for her disappearance. Love meets Theo, a college student, on a chance encounter at the supermarket, while Joe befriends Marianne, Madre Linda's librarian, who allows him to restore rare books to sell for money towards Ellie. Upon discovering at the Conrad's children's birthday that Madre Linda's residents all wear a biosensor developed by Matthew on their rings, Joe and Love exhume Natalie's body, remove her wedding ring, and bury her beneath the foundation of a construction site. The two then reconcile and make a vow to no longer commit murder. Love opens her bakery called A Fresh Tart, beneath which she and Joe build a new plexiglass cage and discover Theo is Matthew's stepson. I like this stuff at the birthday party, but that's about it. Still, the lack of enticing stuff here doesn't detract. A tier. Season 3, Episode 3, Missing White Woman Syndrome. As Natalie's disappearance attracts media attention, Joe and Love decide to frame Matthew for her murder by planting Natalie's blood-stained scarf in her home. Henry contracts measles and is rushed to the hospital while breaking into the Engler home. Joe discovers he too has measles and collapses. Matthew nurses him to health, and Joe suggests he make a statement to the press to clear his name, which Matthew does during a vigil for Natalie. Theo begins flirting with Love, who refuses his advances, though the two later bond at the hospital over Theo's strange relationship with his stepfather. Dottie reveals she and Love's father are divorcing, putting the family finances in flux. As Henry recovers, Joe and Love decide not to frame Matthew and burn the scarf. The police recover Natalie's wedding ring the next day. Gil, a neighbour, reveals to Love at her bakery that his daughters, whom he refused to vaccinate, gave Henry measles. An enraged Love bludgeons him unconscious as he leaves. I like this one, particularly Love bludgeoning Gil. We're really starting to see her come apart at the seams, especially with Theo flirting with her, and it's such an interesting watch. A tier. Season 3, Episode 4, Hands Across Madre Linda. Joe and Love lock Gil in the plexiglass vault in the basement, realizing they cannot release Gil without assurances that he will not report the assault. Joe and Love search for incriminating information they can use as leverage for Gil's silence. Love discovers through her family's private investigator that Gil's son is a sexual predator, who they link to a recent assault case on a college campus. Gil, disgusted to learn his son continued his abusive behavior, hangs himself inside the cage. Joe and Love decide to frame Gil for Natalie's death. Love plants the murder weapon with Gil's fingerprints in the forest, where Sherry has organised a community search for Natalie, while Joe moves Gil's body to his residence and fabricates a suicide note from Gil, declaring that he killed himself out of guilt over murdering Natalie. Ruse works, and 6 months pass by in relative peace. Theo kisses Love after a heartfelt conversation, while Joe starts to become obsessed with Marianne. I really like this one. The interactions with Gil in the cage and how the episode plays out with his suicide is genius to me. We have our first S tier of the season. Season 3, Episode 5, Into the Woods. Joe and Love's therapist suggests that Joe should make new friends, so he agrees to go on a hunting retreat with Kerry, Sherry's husband, and a self-improvement guru, and his friends. Joe discovers that Love has been paying for Theo's Uber trips and confronts her. Love says that Theo has nobody to look after him and confesses that Theo kissed her at the bakery. During the retreat, Carrie takes Joe on a night hunt and provokes him into fighting him. Joe pushes Carrie over a cliff, knocking him out. Joe carries an unconscious Carrie back to camp, where he awakens and declares that he has helped Joe find his inner strength. Joe cries cathartically and embraces his newfound friends. Theo calls Love from the police station after getting detained for driving an electric scooter while inebriated. The two ride the scooter together and later have sex. Joey realizes what Love has done after she gets home, and Love decides to cut ties with Theo. Joe sets off with the bakery's alarm to give himself an alibi to leave the house and stalk Marianne. I really like the stuff with Joe in the forest with Kerry. If only the stuff with Love was as strong as that, this could have been S tier. A tier for now. Season 3, Episode 6, Womb. Joe begins probing into Marianne's private life and discovers she is a recovering addict in the middle of a bitter custody battle with her ex-husband Ryan Goodwin, a local news reporter. He later intervenes in an argument between Ryan and Marianne at the library, but Marianne chastises him. The library's sprinkler system suddenly malfunctions as Joe spends the night helping Marianne salvage books. She opens up about her personal struggles and they kiss. Love, still reeling from Forty's death, believes she may be pregnant with Theo's child, but later begins menstruating. She gets drunk after an argument with her mother, hallucinates Forty's presence, which helps her grieve him. Theo discovers that Matthew has been illegally spying on Madre Linda's residence in an attempt to find Natalie's real killer, and warns Love. Joe and Love agree that the latter should keep Theo around as a source of information on Matthew's investigation. I like the stuff with Joe and Marianne, and Love and the hallucinated Forty. Goes pretty good here too. B tier seems fair. Season 3, Episode 7, We're All Mad Here. Marianne decides to not pursue her feelings for Joe out of morality. Matthew enlists an expert programmer from his company to help him hack into Madre Linda's security feeds. Love unsuccessfully initiates foreplay with Joe, who is now solely interested in Marianne, and later has sex with Theo again. Barry enlists Love to help cater at the library's fundraiser event. Joe plots to take down Ryan by engineering his relapse, but the plan fails, as Joe learns that Ryan is a regular drug taker, and what Joe snuck into his power shake didn't make a difference. Ryan confronts Joe at the fundraiser and tells him that he's aware Joe has been following him. Love meets Marianne at the event. Carrie later approaches Love and tells her that she and Carrie want to try swinging with Love and Joe. He, devastated after losing both Anavrin and her vineyard to her ex-husband in her divorce settlement, kidnaps Henry and burns down the vineyard. She is sentenced to a stay in rehab, and Love cuts ties with her. Dottie confides to Joe that Love may have murdered her first husband, James. The revelation about Love having killed James and Joe going after Ryan, as well as Dottie's breakup, are all interesting things that make the episode a bit better than just okay. I was going to go with C tier, but B feels way more fair. Season 3, Episode 8, Swing and a Miss. Joe goes along with Love's interest in swinging with the Conrads, hoping it will expose their marriage as broken and enable him to pursue a relationship with Marianne. At Marianne's request, Joe testifies at her custody hearing for her and Ryan's daughter. But Marianne later calls Joe and tearfully reveals Ryan publicized sexually explicit photos she had sent him in an attempt to sabotage the case. Joe learns Ryan is friends with the judge in the case. Theo breaks into Matthew's office and discovers his database of Madre Linda's security feeds. Matthew catches him and tells him he suspects Love in Natalie's disappearance. While having sex with the Conrads, Love notices Joe fantasizing about someone else and confronts him in private, loudly reminding him that she killed Natalie out of commitment to her marriage to Joe. The Conrads, who overheard the argument, attempt to flee the house, but Joe and Love subdue them and lock them in the cage. The two have sex afterwards, realizing they are aroused by violence. Again, a decent episode, but that fight scene, man, absolutely fucking amazing. That alone puts us in A tier. I was going to go B, but yeah, it bumps up easily. And if we had more stuff like that, this could have been easily an S tier, but just a bit too much meandering with Theo and the Madre Linda security thing. Season 3, Episode 9, Red Flag. Joe finds Carrie's gun while cleaning up the house. He later finds a dejected Marianne outside the liquor store, where she tells him Ryan is taking their daughter to New Jersey. Joe encourages her not to give up on her daughter. Marianne invites him home to have sex. Ryan later discovers Joe stalking him, leading to a struggle that ends with Joe stabbing Ryan to death. In an attempt to free herself and Carrie from the cage, Sherry suggests to Love that she should expose Matthew's illegal surveillance on Sherry's lifestyle blog. Love gives them Carrie's gun and offers to set one of them free if the other kills them, hoping to stage a murder-suicide. Thea offers to obtain a copy of Matthew's surveillance footage, believing Love to be a victim of Joe's domestic abuse, and based on a video feed of the two of them arguing, Matthew's legal team demands that he deletes his footage. Matthew complies, but not before Theo recovers a backup of the data. Theo analyzes the footage and discovers Joe leaving the bakery with Natalie's car. He goes to the bakery to tell Love, but finds the Conrads imprisoned in the cage. While leaving, he encounters Love, who bludgeons him with a fire extinguisher. Okay, this is the best episode yet. The stuff with Sherry and Carrie in the cage, Love and Theo's thing, Joe killing Ryan. I adore this episode. Non-stop thrills. It's what I wish the last episode had been, but there was too much meandering in that. Anyway, this is an S tier easily. Season 3, Episode 10, What is Love? Love admits to Joe that she attacked Theo and left him in the basement and suggests that the two have another baby. Joe discovers Theo is alive and takes him to the hospital. Love finds Joe's discarded shirt stained with Ryan's blood and realizes Joe is obsessed with Marianne. She confronts him at dinner where Joe asks for a divorce. Love paralyzes Joe with aconite, which she confesses to having accidentally killed James with, and kills Marianne to the house, planning to kill her. While Love is away to deliver an order, Matthew discovers a paralyzed Joe, who reveals Theo's location to him. Love returns and reveals to a horrified Marianne that Joe killed Ryan, but relents from killing her when Marianne's daughter interrupts. After Marianne leaves, Love prepares to kill Joe, but he injects her with a lethal dose of aconite, having known about the poison and taken an antidote before. Joe stages a murder-suicide, writing a note framing Love for all the Madre Linda murders and setting the house on fire. The Conrads find Love's spare key inside the cage and free themselves, strengthening their marriage in the process. Matthew and Theo grow closer over the latter's recovery. Joe leaves Henry in the care of Dante, his co-worker at the library. He then adopts a new identity and escapes to Paris in search of Marianne. Another banger. This is the best season finale so far. People crossing each other, Joe showing actual kindness to Theo and making a painful decision for Henry. It's the only time we've seen him show actual empathy. I love this episode so much. Easy S tier. What happened after? This season had such an impact on me. I remember being on holiday in the country with no Wi-Fi, just this season downloaded to unwind each night, and honestly, it was the highlight of that holiday. It was and still is great. It's leagues better than the book it's based on, and truthfully, I went into the rewatch thinking this wouldn't be as good as I remembered, but it really was. It's a very deserving 9 out of 10. People loved this one, and obviously season 4 had to come. But before we get there, here's our tier list of season 3 episodes. Now let's move on to season 4, released in 2023, starting with some history. You Season 4 was primarily filmed in London and the surrounding English countryside, including Warner Brothers studio Leavesden. I'm happy to see Joe Goldberg in my home country. Principal photography began in March 2022 and wrapped in late August. Filming locations included Royal Holloway, University of London, the Four Seasons Hotel in London, and various locations in West London. Unlike seasons 2 and 3, season 4 of You was released on Netflix in parts, not weekly broadcasts like season 1, but rather 2 5-episode chunks. Part 1 was released on February 9th, 2023, and Part 2 was released on March 9th, 2023. Now, let's get into the recap and reviews. Season 4, Episode 1, Joe Takes a Holiday, which is named that almost definitely because it was stolen from the Dexter episode, Dex Takes a Holiday, because both shows share a lot of crew. In a flashback, Joe Goldberg tracks down Marianne in London, but chooses to let her go after she calls him a murderer. Joe is later met by Elliot Tannenberg, a fixer working for Love's father, who sets him up with a cover identity in exchange for killing Marianne to tie up loose ends. Joe instead pickpockets Marianne's necklace and sends his picture to Elliot to make it appear he killed her. In the present, Joe lives under his new identity as Jonathan Moore, a university English professor. He develops an interest in Kate Galvin, the girlfriend of his obnoxious fellow professor, Malcolm Harding, who lives in the flat across from him. Joe saves Kate from 2 muggers, and to repay him, Malcolm invites him to a party at the elite Sundry house, where Joe befriends author and mayoral hopeful Reese Montrose. Joe gets heavily intoxicated at the party and awakens in his flat to find Malcolm stabbed to death and missing a finger. Assuming he killed Malcolm before blacking out, Joe disposes of his body. The next day, Kate invites Joe to dinner. As Joe arrives, he receives a series of anonymous texts from Malcolm's real killer, thanking him for disposing of the evidence. I like the stuff with the other killer and Joe not knowing if he did it. It's interesting and not something we've seen from you before. Still, doesn't hold a candle to other season premieres. A tier seems fair. Season 4, Episode 2, Portrait of the Artist. Lady Phoebe, Kate's aristocrat best friend, invites Joe to an art exhibition curated by Kate and featuring the works of Simon Sue, a billionaire's son in the friend circle. Joe breaks into Malcolm's office and finds a ledger of gambling debts and various code-named contacts. Joe follows Phoebe's boyfriend Adam Pratt, an American expat who owns Sundry House, and discovers he has a fetish for being urinated on by men. We're not even going to touch that one, there's too many jokes I could make. At the exhibition, Simon's art is vandalized by a woman that Joe and Kate later learn is the real artist behind the paintings, whom Simon got addicted to drugs to discredit her. Joe recalls a reference to the artwork in Malcolm's ledger and believes Simon killed Malcolm to avoid being extorted. However, Simon is murdered that night with the killer cutting off one of his ears. Joe returns home to find his wall covered in newspaper clippings from his past, the killer having deducted his real identity. A bit mid, but the plot thickening of the killer stalking Joe is fun. B tier. Season 4, Episode 3, The Rich. The killer sends Malcolm's finger to the press and is dubbed the Eat the Rich Killer. Joe discovers his student Nadia was in a sexual relationship with Malcolm. It's played by Amy Lee Hickman, who you may know as Nazreen Paracha in Ackley Bridge, another brilliant show. Maybe someday I'll cover that. I just need to know if there's an audience for it. Let me know, or I might just run out of videos and decide to do it anyway. Who knows? At Simon's funeral, the killer orders Joe to kill Kate. Joe follows Kate around to protect her. Though initially cold to Joe, Kate eventually opens up to him, and the two have sex, unaware that Vic is watching them. The next day, Joe follows Kate to a crypt where she pays respects to Malcolm. After she leaves, Vic, who was following Joe, searches him at gunpoint and finds Malcolm's ring, which Joe realizes was planted on him. A struggle ensues, forcing Joe to kill Vic. The killer suggests Joe is aroused by murder. Joe plays along and tells the killer to let him finish Kate, and the killer arranges a meeting with him. He calls Joe to Sundry House where the police are wanting to question him. And kind of mid, but as I've said before, the thickening plot with the Eat the Rich Killer is fun. C tier. Season 4, Episode 4, Hampsey. Joe's invited to Phoebe's family country manor for a weekend getaway. He observes her friends, particularly a socialite named Gemma, behaving callously to the servants. Joe shuts down Phoebe's attempt to seduce him, and she instead confides her concern that Adam does not love her. Adam, meanwhile, tells Joe he plans to propose to Phoebe, in part because her family fortune will rescue him from mounting debts. Joe comes at odds with Roald Walker Burton, Kate's childhood friend, who, as Joe discovers, is obsessed with her. At dinner, Roald chastises Kate for not accepting herself as one of them, while Gemma accuses Joe of being the killer. Kate later reveals to Joe that her father is a powerful investor whom she cut ties with due to the harm his business dealings have done to the world. Joe realizes he may be in love with Kate. Roald confronts Joe about being the killer and pushes him out the second-story window. Joe recovers and hears a scream. He runs to find Kate, only to discover her kneeling over Gemma's corpse with a knife in hand. I love the hijinks in this one, especially heightened by Kate's obsessed friend and the setting of the country manor. A tier. Season 4, Episode 5, Fox and the Hound. Kate insists she did not kill Gemma. Joe comes to believe her and helps her dispose of the body in a barn while the others are partying. Kate confronts Joe about his past after noticing his apparent experience with covering up murders. Joe admits that he disposed of Malcolm's body and that whoever framed him is now trying to frame Kate. Kate goes to tell Phoebe to dismiss the servant staff. While she is away, Roald discovers Joe in the barn and brings him to the others, accusing him of being the killer. Despite Joe's protests, Roald gives him a head start to flee before pursuing with a shotgun. Joe subdues Roald in the woods, only to be captured and placed in a dungeon by the real killer, Reese, who, having come from poverty, committed the murders out of a hatred towards the rich. Reese tells Joe to kill Roald so they can frame him for the murders, and when Joe refuses, Reese sets the dungeon on fire and leaves. Joe escapes and frees Roald, and the two are rescued by Kate. Joe does not tell the others about Reese and vows to bring him down himself. Reese announces his candidacy for Mayor of London. Once again, we have an amazing episode that feels like a part 2, like what we saw in Season 2. Fucking amazing. Everything in the manor amps up, and the reveal of Reese as the killer is startling. But trust me, it gets crazier. It would be a crime to not put this in S tier though. Season 4, Episode 6, Best of Friends. Reese forces Joe to find somebody to frame him for the murders. and places Simon's severed ear in his freezer. Joe initially plans to frame Connie, a member of the Oxford group who confides his struggles with addiction, but later relents when Connie decides to get clean. Kate's latest gallery fundraiser, Phoebe is held captive in a hotel room by Dawn, a woman posing as a waitress who has a parasocial obsession with her. Joe negotiates his way into the room and plots Simon's ear in Dawn's bag before the police arrive, thus getting Dawn arrested and framed for the Eat the Rich murders. Nadia, who witnesses the arrest, becomes suspicious of Joe. Adam proposes to Phoebe, but Phoebe, who has now learned of his financial problems from Dawn, rejects him. Joe and Kate admit their feelings for one another after Kate promises not to inquire into Joe's past. Reese gives Joe a final task: kill his rival political donor, Tom Lockwood, Kate's father. A bit weaker than the episode before, but it's still fun, especially now we actually get to see Joe and the real Eat the Rich killer interact. A tier. Season 4, Episode 7, Good Man, Cruel World. Joe accompanies Kate to dinner with her father, who is visiting London. Lockwood reveals he's known Joe's real identity. Lockwood soon gets an article published revealing that Reese fabricated much of his memoir. Reese reveals he has kidnapped Marianne and forces Joe to kill Lockwood to save her. Phoebe struggles with the PTSD symptoms after her kidnapping. Kate arranges her to stay at a clinic, but Phoebe instead decides to marry Adam. Joe prepares to kill Lockwood, but Lockwood instead enlists him to kill Reese, giving him the location of a countryside cottage where Reese has gone into hiding since the publication of his exposé. Joe finds Reese, who claims he doesn't know who he is. Joe tortures Reese for Marianne's location. Reese pleads his innocence, but Joe ends up killing him, only to then discover that the Reese he has been interacting with has been a figment of his imagination. Nadia, meanwhile, finds a key in Joe's apartment that leads to a room where Marianne has been trapped in a glass cage. Man, the cat's finally out the bag, and I'm glad we got to this episode because I wanted to talk about this and wanted to talk about the Reese stuff without spoiling it for anyone who might be watching these recaps because they haven't seen the show and is just curious. But it's so good. It's great. I know I made the same joke that I made in the intro, but there's a Tyler Durden situation on our hands, and it's amazing. Joe has been imagining Reese, and it's, that reveal. Mwah. All it needed was Where Is My Mind? It's peak. And honestly, I'm just going to say this. I'm so shocked that I haven't cottoned on to when two characters end up being the same person anymore. First with the Tyler Durden one. First time I ever saw it, okay, that's going to be a shocker. Then, fucking You does it, okay, shocker. And then it happened in The Boys as well. And every time it's had me like being like, what the fuck? But still, nonetheless, the stuff with Tom Lockwood is great too. This has to be an S tier. Season 4, Episode 8. Where are you going? Where have you been? Joe is revealed to have drugged and kidnapped Marianne before she could leave London and locked her in a glass cage in the basement of an abandoned building across from Reese's favourite restaurant. Joe had been exhaustively researching Reese's life, finding commonalities between Reese's story rising out of a life of crime and poverty and his own desire for moral redemption. Upon imprisoning Marianne, Joe suffered from a psychotic break that caused him to dissociate, resulting in gaps in his memory where he kidnapped Marianne and later committed the murders. Having forgotten he kidnapped Marianne, Joe left her to starve in the cage. The Reese in Joe's visions proclaims himself to be a figment of his darker impulses and helps him remember where he kept the key to Marianne's location. Joe arrives at the building, and at the same time, Nadia explains to Marianne her plan to help her escape. I love this one too. Again, it feels like a part 2 as we discover how Joe actually snapped and became schizophrenic. This is great. It's better than its spiritual first part, and I have to say, I'm also giving that S tier, then I'm giving this S tier for the same reason. Season 4, Episode 9, She's Not There. She manages to hide while a horrified Joe finds Marianne and promises to set her free. Nadia later procures some ketamine from her boyfriend Edward to use on Joe. Joe and Kate attend Adam and Phoebe's wedding party and attempt to convince Phoebe, whose mental state has declined, not to marry Adam. Phoebe is later committed to a psychiatric care institute after suffering a breakdown at the wedding party. Adam is killed by a hitman posing as a prostitute, who, as Kate learns, was sent by her father. She refuses his request to take over his business. Joe takes Phoebe's diazepam to expunge his visions of Reese, but he experiences a nightmare in which he sees Gemma, Beck, and Love, which convinces him the only way to end his obsessive cycle is to kill himself. He awakens to go free Marianne, only to find she overdosed on medication he left in there earlier for her. Fun episode, but nothing special if I'm honest. The highlight is definitely the cameos of Elizabeth Lail and Victoria Pedretti as Beck and Love respectively. I would have liked Amber Childers to return as Candace instead of Gemma, but we can't have everything. And I mean, it's kind of sad because Candace really felt like she was being set up as this big looming threat that would go through the whole show and ultimately be the one to take down Joe, and it just doesn't happen. Kind of blew their load too early there, I guess, but she doesn't survive in the books if I remember correctly. I've read them ages ago, so I really couldn't tell you. But yeah, back to the review. I'd really like to put this ridiculously high, but I can't let it coast up the list purely because of one scene. B tier, and even that feels kind of generous. Season 4, Episode 10, The Death of Jonathan Moore. Believing Marianne to have died, Joe disposes of her body at a park to make her look like she overdosed. Nadia, however, tells Edward that she and Marianne plotted to fake the latter's death by replacing her medication with beta blockers that lowered her blood pressure so that she could escape. Kate tells Joe that her father revealed himself to have bankrolled her every venture, even after their estrangement, and confides her fear of never escaping his control. Joe kills Lockwood and the next morning attempts suicide by jumping off a bridge. However, the police rescue him. He awakens in the hospital to find Kate, who tells him she's inherited all her father's assets and has already covered up Joe's involvement in Reese's death. Joe decides to accept his darker half. He kills Edward and frames Nadia for the crime. Sophie and Princess Blessing buy Sundry House, which Roald and Connie continue to frequent with no signs of change. After rehab, Lady Phoebe moves to Thailand to teach children, while Marianne reads an article about Joe, while safely home with Juliet back in Paris. Joe moves back to New York City with Kate, who runs her father's business after his death, and helps Joe rehabilitate his public image, now acting as Love's escaped victim. Everything wraps up quite neatly in this finale. I really fucking like it. No notes, S tier. Truthfully, this could have been the show ending. We had another season, and despite being controversial, I enjoy it. So we're going to get to that in a minute, but first, let's cover after. Honestly, this season didn't hit at first, but the second half was mind-bending, and I loved it. Everyone else did too, because there were a bunch of people praising the twist. Obviously, as is tradition now, it did well enough for another season, and that's all I did have when I was writing this script. But Season 5 has finally come out, and before we get there, as is tradition, here's our ranking so far.
Now let's move on to Season 5. Netflix's You renewed for a 5th season on March 24th, 2023, with co-creators Michael Foley and Justin W. Lowe replacing Sarah Gamble as showrunners. Penn Badgley returns as Joe Goldberg, joined by a new cast member, Madeline Brewer as Bronte, and Anna Camp in dual roles as Regan and Maddie Lockwood. Returning characters include Charlotte Ritchie as Kate, Tati Gabrielle as Marianne, and Frankie DeMaio as Joe's son, Henry, finally returning after not being in Season 4, albeit this time a bit older. Additional guest stars included Natasha Benham, Pete Plozek, Tom Francis, Nava Mai, Amy Lee Hickman, and Catherine Gallagher. Filming took place in New York City from March to August of 2024. Originally planned for a 2024 release, the season was delayed due to industry strikes and instead premiered on April 24th, 2025, with 10 episodes released simultaneously on Netflix. Business as usual. Let's begin with Season 5, Episode 1, The Luckiest Guy in NY. 3 years after returning to New York, Joe has officially become famous due to his relationship with Kate, has his son Henry back, and has put Moonies up for sale. Through his brother-in-law Teddy, Joe finds out that there is a hit piece about Kate that is going to be published about an old deal she made which would ruin her reputation. Teddy and Joe confront Regan Lockwood, Kate's half-sister, who denies involvement in the hit piece. Joe finds out that there is a coup planned between Regan, her sister Maddie, and Kate's mentor Bob. Joe later fantasizes about murdering Bob and is caught writing about it by Kate in Moonies. While leaving, he meets Bronte, who had been borrowing books from the shop. When Kate confronts Bob, he confirms he leaked the information to the press and reveals he knows about Kate's involvement in covering up Reese Montrose's death. Joe murders Bob and stages his suicide later that night. Upon visiting Moonies again, Joe discovers Bronte and offers her a job there. Later, Joe goes to his basement, where he reassembles the cage. It's a really fun episode, but in retrospect, nothing special happened, and half of my enjoyment honestly came from getting to see early at the digital premiere. B tier. Season 5, Episode 2, Blood Will Have Blood. Joe and Kate attend the school because Henry assaulted Regan's daughter, Gretchen. The principal begins to harass Joe about his past, which frustrates him. Kate arranges a dinner with Regan to discuss the matter. Regan brings Maddie to corner Kate, but she brings Teddy. At the dinner party, Regan demands that Joe and Kate confront each other, which they do, Regan accuses Kate of orchestrating Bob's murder and calls her a murderer. Despite Teddy's help following the accusations, Henry pulls a knife on Regan. Regan proposes to find Kate's darkest secrets and oust her from the position of CEO. Joe proposes to Kate to kill Regan, but she abruptly rejects the idea. Joe begins to have differences with Kate and plots to kill Regan anyway. One night, Joe knocks Regan unconscious and leaves her husband, Harrison, trapped. While they're about to have sex, Joe opens up to Henry about his mother, Love Quinn. Kate questions Joe's motives for killing. Regan announces to Kate that she'll sue Henry, and Joe discovers that he got the wrong twin, having locked up Maddie. Really fun episode. That twist at the end honestly takes it to another level, but we have some even better episodes coming. A tier. Season 5, Episode 3, Imposter Syndrome. Joe tries to break Maddie out of the cage, but she's uncooperative. Joe feels increasingly alienated by Kate. Joe rehires Bronte after their understanding the day before. He and Bronte go book shopping and begin to grow closer. Bronte takes Joe to a literary centre. She reunites with her ex-boyfriend Clayton, who betrays her. Clayton ridicules her by reading a sexual poem of hers. Bronte tries to defend herself, but Clayton reveals that she stole from him, and her real name is Louise. Kate goes to Regan's house to tell her she knows about her embezzlement, but Regan is devastated by Harrison's infidelity, and they both agree to put the children aside. Joe comforts a devastated Bronte, and they flirt. Joe begins to obsess over Bronte. At home, Kate tells Joe she wants his help, short of killing people. Joe tries to get Kate to accept her darkness, but she refuses. Later, Joe and Kate watch a live broadcast of Regan posing as Maddie, in which she gives up her board vote to destroy Kate. Joe suggests that Maddie pretend to be Regan and take her down. Again, nothing special. I have no notes really. B tier. Season 5, Episode 4, My Fair Maddie. Joe begins to try to get Maddie to act like Regan, but makes little progress after a conversation with Bronte. Joe finds inspiration for Maddie. Kate meets Regan with demands that she resign or she will go public with her embezzlement. Regan counteracts by revealing she has discovered that Joe killed Montrose and Bob and forces her to resign or she will expose them. Kate reveals this to Joe and he states that Regan must die. It reveals that she wanted her dead and that she knows of her own darkness, but rejects that in both of them. Joe decides to go after Regan at her house anyway, and a fight breaks out between the two until Joe knocks her out. And I haven't played any scenes from any episode so far, mainly to avoid copyright, because I don't want to deal with that. But you need to see this scene with Washing Machine Heart playing out, and after Joe's attacking Regan, it's a really big scene. I'm going to play a clip for you now.
Really wish I could finish the job. But for now, I need her alive.
Bronte discovers Joe's writings about his passion for her. Joe locks Regan in the cage and tells Maddie to kill her so he can get out. During the bookstore opening, Clayton again harasses Bronte and Joe threatens him. Maddie kills Regan after a heated argument. Maddie, as Regan, resigns from her position. And when Kate doesn't thank him, Joe claims the marriage is broken later. Joe and Bronte have sex. This is the first superb episode. I love the dynamic between Joe and Maddie as they channel their inner Regan. I love the stuff with the real Regan and Kate as they feud too. And that Washing Machine Heart scene, obviously. An obvious S tier. Season 5, Episode 5, Last Dance. Joe is smitten with Bronte and ignores warning signs, while his wife Kate secretly investigates his dark past. Kate overhears a suspicious moment involving Joe and Bronte and confides in Teddy, who urges her to leave Joe. Meanwhile, Joe is deep into his scheme of helping Maddie pose as Regan, but Maddie's losing her grip on which part of her personality is hers and demands they speed things up. Bronte suddenly disappears, leaving a vague goodbye note, prompting Joe to suspect foul play. He traces her to a beach house in which she tases him and firmly rejects his attempts to save her, but they still reconnect intimately. Back home, Kate's world is unraveling as Maddie cracks under her own identity crisis and Teddy warns Kate of the cost of complicity. The drama peaks when Clayton bursts into the beach house and is aggressive with Bronte, so Joe kills him. Just one problem, it was a trap. Clayton's friends capture the murder live on TikTok and reveal they baited Joe. I fucking love this episode. The bit at the end with the reveal is great. The melodrama between Kate and Joe and Bronte is a bit grating by this point though, and I know a lot of people had a problem with Joe being taken down by TikTok, but I don't know, it's very stupid, yes, I agree, but we just need to accept that in the current day, this is going to become more common to have real world things that people don't really like TikTok, being the big climaxes in TV shows and movies. And also, I know what's coming next, and if you don't, then you're going to see they do play this out well. They play this out really well. So, S tier. Season 5, Episode 6, The Dark Face of Love. Joe is arrested by the police for killing Clayton, but Kate's lawyers take him away. Bronte tells a detective she was a student and a friend of Guinevere Beck. In one of her classes, Bronte tells Beck she had to leave her to go home to take care of her sick mother, which she understands. Bronte discovered that Beck had been murdered, but she didn't believe the theory and searches for another truth. Bronte joined a group that wants to take down Joe, which are Dominique and Dr. Nikki's son, Clayton. They investigated Joe for years until his apparent death. When they discovered that Joe is alive and famous, they decided to go to New York. Bronte met Joe and considered making him fall in love with her to catch him, but she began to believe he was innocent. Bronte went to Atlantic City to leave Joe, but he followed her. Clayton discovered this and began to attack her, so Joe showed up and killed him. Bronte claims it was self-defense and that Joe saved her. Joe, back home now, discovers that Kate made him sign custody papers and that if he tries anything, he'll lose everything. Joe is planning to win Henry back. I really like this episode, especially seeing how it all ties back to Beck. Elizabeth Lail's return was greatly welcomed. A tier. Season 5, Episode 7, Hashtag Joe Goldberg. After the video of Joe killing Clayton is released, Joe becomes the center of attention throughout New York. Joe tries to get Henry back with a lawyer, but he tells him it will take time. Kate asks Teddy to take Henry so Joe can't find him, but Joe gives Henry a book with a locator attached to it. Bronte abandons Dom and her plan to stop Joe, claiming he saved her. Joe finds Henry with Teddy, who struggles until Henry shows up. Joe is taken out of the house. Dom and her friend Phoenix expose more of Joe's possible murders, and social media fills with people from his past rallying for his comeuppance. Again, another great scene. I haven't played many. I'm going to play this one for you. Season 5 had some bangers.
Yourself another glass, Dottie. Your darling baby girl was a psychopath, and she was the one that locked me.
Us. Locked us.
These two.
Psycho absolutely killed my best friend, Peach. He hated her.
Oh, Peach was self-defense, and I don't even remember your name.
Always cancelling class early. To do what? Kill people?
I was dissociating!
My mom used to date this guy that was really abusive.
No, don't share the incriminating part.
And Joe literally saved us.
Shut the fuck up, Paco.
I can't definitively rule out that Joe murdered a fuck ton of people.
All the good I've done, all the people I've saved, and now I'll never not be known as the guy who might have killed a fuck ton of people.
Joe threatens Maddie with posting how he killed Regan if she doesn't help him. Maddie arranges an interview with a journalist to explain the truth, but breaks down into tears when talking about his childhood. When Bronte reveals that she supported Joe, Joe claims that what he did was out of love, and people begin to rally around him. But some even criticize Bronte. Kate decides to go to London and see Nadia Ferran in prison. When Bronte is about to be kidnapped, Joe knocks out the kidnapper. I adore this episode. Call me stupid, but I love the fan service. Seeing Sherry, Kerry, Paco, Dottie, and Ron getting mentioned, the splice of everyone Joe's killed in the past, including Benji, Beck, and Love, it's amazing. It's a really well put together scene. S fucking tier. I don't even care. Season 5, Episode 8, What Do You Do? Joe believes his fear of showing his true self is why he hasn't found true love. In good news for him, Bronte is supposedly the love of his life. However, he hints that possibly needing to kill her if things didn't go well. Joe explains he handcuffed her because he didn't want her to hurt her ankle. He uncuffs her and her ankle is indeed bad. Much of their interaction is slow, with them repeating what we already know, mainly that Joe is a psychopath. Nadia reminds Kate that Joe is the eat-the-rich killer, which Kate shockingly never connected. In a predictable plot, Joe tries to be honest with Bronte about what life with him entails, but she shows poor judgment by entering the basement where Joe has locked up her attacker, Dane. Joe tries to empower Bronte by suggesting she decides what to do with Dane, but he goes against her wishes and kills Dane anyway. Maddie, trying to escape the situation with Harrison, and Joe's usual plans to eliminate problems, lead to further chaotic interactions. Kate learns how slow the legal process is regarding Joe, leading her to decide she needs to kill him. Alright, yeah, melodrama with Joe and Bronte is getting a bit much, but the episode is slightly redeemed by the Maddie-Joe subplot. B tier. Season 5, Episode 9, Trial of the Furies. Joe plans to start a new life with Bronte, but not before getting rid of the Lockwoods.
Unbeknownst to Harrison, Joe frames him for killing Regan, while Maddie is arrested for covering for him and posing as her sister. While out with Bronte, Joe discovers that Kate has drained his bank account and taken his apartment and bookstore, so Joe decides he must kill Kate. Joe follows Kate to a parking lot but discovers it's a trap and is sedated. Joe is put in his cage and discovers that Kate and Nadia are working together. Nadia and Kate tell him to confess to his crimes and they'll let him go. Nadia and Kate bring in Marianne Bellamy. Joe discovers from Marianne that they'll kill him and Nadia tries to do it, but Kate stops her. Marianne has a conversation with Bronte about how Joe is actually the bad guy. Kate decides to kill Joe alone, but Joe breaks free with a key to the cage he sewed into his fucking arm. And again, gonna show you this scene. Season 5 has some really, really good ones.
You missed a key.
He locks Joe in the basement and sets fire to the bookstore. Joe and Kate have a heart-to-heart where Kate tricks him into confessing on recording, and Joe is rescued by Bronte. Joe proposes to Bronte and she accepts in order to stop Joe. Holy shit, what an episode. It goes crazy. Mooney's on fire, an absolute mental one. With the key in his arm and Joe's interaction with Kate and Nadia and Marianne turning up, S tier. Really big S tier. Season 5, episode 10, finale. Joe and Bronte begin to go on the run after Kate's recorded confession of Joe's crimes. Bronte debating where to corner Joe. Joe's plans to cross the border into Canada under a false identity provided by Will Bettelheim, who's back, including Henry. Joe and Bronte stay at a house for a night until they get to the papers. The two take a romantic boat ride, and while they're having sex, Bronte points a gun at Joe and demands to know how he killed Beck, but he won't tell her. Joe manages to contact Henry through Will, but Henry rejects him and calls him a monster. Joe attempts to kill Bronte but fails. Bronte calls 911 and Joe chokes her, but the cops show up. Joe drops a great line, and it's used in all the edits. It's a really good one. Penn Badgley is amazing in this role. I'm going to show you this clip.
It was always going to end this way, wasn't it?
No, it didn't have to! But you're ungrateful! You're spiteful! I made you special! Bronte, and you're too selfish to know how good you've had it! You want to know how I killed Beck? I'll show you.
He kills a cop while trying to escape, but is cornered by Bronte, who shoots him in the cock, and he's arrested. Joe is sentenced to prison. Bronte rewrites Beck's book, removing Joe's additions. Kate, who survived the fire, leaves the company and helps Marianne with her art and raises Henry. Nadia leaves prison and becomes a writer. Joe, in prison, reads fan mail, thinking he's not the problem, but society. I love this finale. I do think it wrapped up a bit too neatly. I just don't buy that every one of Joe's victims that lived would move on so quickly. Doesn't mean I'm not going to give this an S tier. Yeah, sure, I'm going to do it. Why not? I was debating between S and A, but we're doing it. All the pluses here. The scene with Henry and Joe going on a rampage with the police closing in on him, and Joe in prison with his final monologue. How can I not fuck with this episode when it ends with Radiohead? What a season finale. Wasn't as tight as I'd like, but it's still something. The reaction is a bit split for everyone. Some love it like I do, some dislike it. Or at least that's how it was when it released. I think these days a lot more people have come round to the finale being okay, or really liking it like they did in the past.
So we reached the end of the video. It's taken me ages to make this, and I'm kind of annoyed that it took so long. And because of that, the style of it has changed a lot from, being on camera to, using video footage and just my voice. I don't know why, that's just kind of how I do things now. But I'm proud of how it's turned out, and because of how happy I am, I'm kind of out of the rut of posting a video and not getting many views and being miffed because of it. And, I don't really feel like I wasted my time making this. Maybe the person who wasted their time because they watched it is you.